It's no secret that I'm a fan of FPS games. I also tend to love when they're free. So when Shadow Warrior 3 was released in March and it was also available instantly on PS Now, I knew I had to give it a go. I was a fan of the original build engine DOS game, along with the reboot. The reboot's sequel was kind of meh to me, as I found the interface to be kind of clunky, the enemies annoying to fight, and the gameplay too loot-oriented for its own good. So how does the reboot's sequel's sequel fare? The reviews I had seen made me a bit apprehensive to play the game, but negative reputations never stopped me before. If anything, I'm drawn more to the bad games than the good, as I just have got to see how terrible they are for myself. Anywho, Shadow Warrior 3 takes place immediately after the second game. I couldn't motivate myself to finish it due to boredom, although I really tried, which is why this review is a bit past the original release. Apparently, the hero, Lo Wang, pulled an oopsie and released an ancient dragon into the world, causing absolute pandemonium. Lo Wang sums it all up for you, talking to an abandoned mask of his demon pal Hoji, and using puppets to tell the story, while Lo Wang is in his underwear, for some reason. His former employer Zilla stops by and interrupts him with a plan to eliminate the dragon, save the world, and white Wang's Wong. Okay, I won't do that again. Right from the start, something bothered me. Lo Wang's voice seemed off. I'm guessing there was a different voice actor. He does a good enough job, I suppose, but after playing the first two games, seeing the same character in the third game with a noticeably different accent always feels jarring. And that's not just a knock on this specific game. It feels weird no matter what game series you play. I mean, look at Solid Snake. I don't care what anyone says. David Hayter is Snake, and anyone else is an imposter. Now that that's out of the way, let's talk about the gameplay. I'm going to be blunt here. The game feels like it's trying to emulate Doom Eternal. You navigate linear stages, jumping around on platforms and along walls, use a grappling hook to attach to floating green rings and smaller enemy demons, and fight in large rooms, where you need to eliminate the larger threats to open up the path to the next area, all while smaller enemies endlessly spawn to give you chances to replenish health and ammo. There are also glory kills, here called fatalities, but they are activated a bit differently. Here you need to kill enemies to gather fatality orbs, which charge up a meter. Small enemies require a full bar, and the majority of thugs require 2, with only one late game monstrosity needing 3 full gauges to take down. Other than instantly defeating the creature, regardless on their current health, there is another benefit to pulling off these fatalities, usually in the form of a limited time weapon. Some of the weapons are a hell of a lot more useful. For example, the laser bomb, double Gatling guns, and firework cannon can do some hefty damage. On the other hand, the crosshair seeking eye blade, massive drill, and the hammer seem to get me in more trouble than they were worth. In addition, the smaller thugs don't give you weapons, and instead act as a form of support. One gives you an ice grenade that freezes a large proximity of its landing point, allowing you to get in some easy strikes. The others is a simple head smash that somehow grants you a boost to 200 HP, along with a few seconds of invulnerability, so it can be helpful to get you out of some sticky situations. One thing I will admit is that there were a few times I had trouble getting these finishing moves to work properly. In order to perform them, you were supposed to press L1 and R1. I don't know what the problem was, but a few times it just didn't work. There were other times in which I intended for the finisher to be applied to a different enemy than it actually occurred on, even though I was looking directly at the proper demon I wanted to off. The worst part is that not only did I often die because of this mishap, but even if and when I survived, I just emptied out my fatality gauge, which really blows. There were even times I'd get so frustrated that I wouldn't even bother trying to utilize these moves for a while. So we know that we have these super badass finishing moves, but how can we beat the demons using normal means? Well, unlike the second game, you only have a small handful of weapons that are given to you at specific points of the game. You get one sword and about 6 or 7 guns. Each weapon has its use, and it's easy enough to switch between sword and firearm, since R1 always does a melee slash, and R2 shoots your last used gun. To my knowledge, there are no iron sights, which is fine with me in a fast-paced arcade-style shooter like this. It would have been nice to have a weapon cycle option, but instead you have to hold up a weapon selection wheel in order to bring out the proper method of destruction. At least the game is kind enough to slow down the action while you choose. The complaint I have about the guns was the biggest, and really only, problem I had with Doom Eternal. I felt as if I was always running out of ammo. Even with the upgrades that increased your max ammunition reserves, I was constantly swapping weapons. At least ammo pickups are applied to all of your weapons, but even so, higher ammo counts would have been beneficial. This is especially the case because enemies truly feel like bullet sponges. When you can dump every shell from your shotgun into a single enemy and they still aren't dead? Kind of annoying, I must admit, but it does make you search for other ways to kill the demons, such as your sword. You do also get a lone cheat technique, a simple blast that pushes enemies away. At first, you can only perform this against the minor demons, but it can be upgraded to work against the larger ones as well. I personally didn't find a ton of use for this glorified shove. Sure, it's fun to impale the little bastards on the various spikes you'll find on the walls, but even so, they will endlessly spawn until the larger enemies are defeated, so unless you're doing it to get some ammo or health, it's kind of a waste of time. Instead of a traditional experience system, Shadow Warrior 3 instead opts for a much simpler 2-color orb upgrade mechanic. One color, purple, is for the character upgrades, while the other, white, is for increasing your weapon's deadliness. Many of the orbs are nearly impossible to miss, due to them being in plain sight as you are progressing through the linear levels. Others, of course, are hidden ever so slightly, forcing you to do a bare minimum of exploration. Let it be known, upgrades aren't entirely essential to completing the game. I found most of the upgrades to be useless for my specific playstyle. Max HP boosts, constantly replenishing health, and larger ammo capacities are beneficial to all, but most of the other upgrades I felt I could pass on and still do fine. As always, depending on how you play this genre of game, your mileage may vary. I think that's all I need to say about the combat, so let's move on to the platforming. There's enough of it to keep things interesting, but after a while, it all feels the same. The grappling hook really feels gimmicky, as you can't latch on to everything that you want, and the floating green rings that you can grapple to often look out of place, making you question why exactly they are suspended there in the first place. Other than these rings, which are on rare occasion plastered to a wall, the only thing that you can grapple to are the smaller enemies. You can never pull yourself up to one of the larger creatures. In addition, there's a heavy reliance on the downhill sections that you come across. In these, Lowang is going on a declining slope, and you have to time your jumps to potential wall run and wall climb opportunities, made obvious by the green moss-like growths on the walls and even floor. The first few times, these are actually pretty fun. Actually, scratch that. They were always fun, except a few hours into the game, and you'll come to realize that the developers must have really loved these segments. A few of them add in some fancy trick shots to remove demon growth, which functions as an obstacle to block your path. Even though I feel that there are a lot of these sections, the set pieces and scenery always made it worth it. Speaking of scenery, the graphics as a whole are really well done. There were more than a few times that after a massive fight, I just stopped to enjoy the world that the game takes place in. In fact, the game really does open on a high note, literally. You are fighting on the back of the apocalyptic dragon, complete with a storm brewing all around you, all while Lo Wang is trying to clamber to its head to figure out how to slay it. After this are sections in a bamboo forest, of which I always enjoy. I'll talk about the last thing before I wrap this review up, the humor. In many of the reviews that I read online, people complain about the quote-unquote poop and dick jokes. I, on the other hand, can be quite immature, and was perfectly fine with this style of comedy. That, along with the other various pop culture digs, and the fact that the witch's tanuki sounded a bit like Kenny from South Park, made me chuckle a small handful of times, although I did groan a bit at the rooster boss named the Ancient Cock. So I'll sum it up simply by saying that Shadow Warrior 3's humor may not be everyone's cup of tea. In a nutshell, Shadow Warrior 3 isn't as bad as the critic reviews make it out to seem. It does what it does well. Sure, it's short, with about a 5 to 6 hour runtime, but at least the game doesn't overstay its welcome. I wouldn't be surprised if DLC arrives to further elaborate on what happens after the dragon is dead, but as it stands, Shadow Warrior 3 is a good game to spend a lazy day playing. I just wouldn't recommend it at full price, that's all. Final score? 5 out of 7. This is Reaper. Happy fragging.